Hi everyone. So in this section, we are going to talk about how to write the discussion part of a research paper. So we are done with the introduction, the methods, and the results section. And now we are going to talk about how to write discussion. So what should be included in the discussion section? We need to reiterate the research problem which we are working on and write the major findings. We also need to explain the meaning and importance of these findings. We need to relate our study findings to what was published previously. So this part we have done a little bit in the introduction section also. If you remember, when we do the literature review for the introduction section, we do find what was done previously, but when we do that in the introduction, we do that to find the gap in knowledge. Over here, we are going to find what was published previously so that we can relate what did the other studies find and what did we find. So make sure when you find these citations or references, these citations for the studies previously published, which you want to include in the discussion section, should be different from the studies that you have included in the introduction section. There could be a overlap of, let's say, one or two studies, but you cannot simply use the all the references that were in the introduction again in the discussion. Then we also need to discuss about the similarities and differences in our research work and what was found previously. So when you're going to find previously published literature, this is what you're going to discuss in the discussion section, where you will write what was similar and different based on the previous literature. We also need to include the strengths of the study, acknowledge study limitations, and write about future research suggestions. So we will cover in detail each of these points over here. So discussion on research problem and major findings. We need to briefly write about the research problem. So the beginning of the discussion section, we should just briefly restate that this is what we were working on and this is what we found, and further go on and state the methodological approach which was used to address this specific research question, and I will show you examples of this further, and also briefly describe the major findings. And this should be your first paragraph. So whenever you start the discussion, you have to start by covering all these points, and remember that you have to write these in direct statements and you have to be concise. So when I say concise, you shouldn't exceed more than a page. This should be like half a page. This should be the first paragraph. For 5-6 sentences, maximum 7-8 sentences. And also, when I say write in direct statements, what I mean is you have to write "we found that," or "in this study it was seen that." So it has to be like, very direct and to the point. So next, you also need to include meaning and importance of these findings. So you already have your results section. You have explained your results. And in this section, and this is basically the second paragraph. So over here, you are describing the meaning and importance. So when you're writing this, you have to assume that the reader is learning about this topic for the first time. It could be that the reader is familiar with this specific topic that you're working on. However, when we write it, we have to write assuming that anyone who is reading this has zero knowledge about this specific topic. And also, we need to explain the significance of the work, assuming that the reader has not thought how important it is. So again, take this as if you are you are trying to convince someone, right? So, in order for this paper to be publishable, you have to convince the reviewer that this is important, and that convincing needs to be done through your writing. So, in this specific paragraph, when you're describing the meaning and importance, you need to explain that why your research is important and how it will make a significant impact in this particular field. Also, explain the importance using the gap in knowledge. So again, in the introduction, you have identified that this is the gap in knowledge and that is why you're doing this study. But when it comes to discussion, you have to use that gap in knowledge, that this is something that was not done previously, and how important is this to the field, and that is why this research is extremely important. Again, I will show you examples of this in published papers. But remember to not confuse this gap in knowledge to what was done in the introduction. In the discussion section, you should use this gap in knowledge as a strength or as an advantage, so that you can explain the importance of why you're doing this research and why it is important. Also state what is already known and what your research could mean to future studies. So again, you have done this in the introduction section to tell the audience why you are conducting this study. But when you are writing this same thing in the discussion section, you have to write this in a way where stating that you have to write this in a way stating that how important your research is for future studies. So, when you're stating what is already known, again, remember you did this in your introduction. Please do not confuse the two. When you are writing what is already known on that specific topic in the discussion section, you have to use that to refer to what your specific research could mean and how it could contribute to future studies. So, again, we will see examples of this. Again, you have to relate your research findings to prior research. So you should be able to write this section using the literature review that you conducted. You have to connect the study findings with the literature which is included in the introduction section. So again, I said previously that do not copy paste or repeat all the citations from your introduction. But let's say there is a specific study that you cited in your introduction, which says that Smith et al. Said that in their 2015 article XYZ. So now, when you're writing the same thing in your discussion, you can tie it back to the introduction, saying that in this study, we found our results to be positive in association with the exposure and outcome, and similar findings were seen in Smith et al. And you know that you have already written this in the introduction, and you are only reiterating this so that you can make a very significant impact and a very strong point. So, remember this, whenever you write a paper, it is like telling a story, right? So a story always starts with an introduction. It starts with the introduction of characters, and you have already introduced your research. You have already introduced your characters, which are your variables, and then you have also explained what was found, right? So you have also explained your results section, and now this what you're writing right now is your climax of the story. So this is basically the discussion section, where you have to tie it back to the introduction. And again, when I say tie it back to the introduction, you have to think about what you wrote in the introduction, and in the discussion you have to kind of summarize it using either a few of the same literature which was used in the introduction, and also adding new literature. So this is the way you have to write your discussion section. Again, you have to establish the credibility of your research findings by comparing your study results with other studies. So when you're establishing this credibility, make sure that you include some new citations in here so that you can say that there were several studies in the past 2 decades which found similar results, or if you do not find similar results, then you can say uh, our results were contradictory to the studies that were found in the past 2 decades. Okay, so use the existing literature and compare your results to the other studies to establish the credibility of your research. Also compare your study methods, your approach, and what you found thus far on the topic. You need to compare it with what was done previously. So this is how you're going to use prior research which was done on the same topic that you will be working on. Next, coming to similarities and differences in your research. Make sure that you discuss the findings from your research which are similar to work that has been published previously on the same topic. Discuss the findings from your result which are not in line with previously published literature also. So again, when you are writing this section, you have to first establish a credibility by taking literature wherein the results that you found from your study are similar to what those studies have found previously. And once you do that, you further go ahead and you can also say, however, there were a few studies which have been published in the, let's say, past 5 years, which are not in line with the results of this paper, because, and then you can go on and further explain that why the results from those studies are different, and there could be several reasons why the results from a few studies are different, because they used a different set of variables, or because they limited their follow-up to a particular year, right? So there could be like several reasons that you could give when you are talking about results from literature which are not in line with your particular research that you have done. So similarities and differences you need to mention, you need to use citations, and you need to give specific examples and explanations when you're writing this. Also, consider different explanations, some alternative explanations of your findings in relation to your hypothesis. Now, again, what do I mean by this? I will tell you this when I go to the examples. But remember that you should be able to give some kind of an explanation as to why you are getting the findings that you have obtained in your specific study hypothesis. So in short, be ready to defend your position, be ready to defend your take or your approach on this specific topic. So this is what you will be doing in this part of the discussion. So next, coming to strengths and limitations, you have to mention what were the strengths of the study and what were the limitations of the study. You can, when it comes to strengths of the study, you can mention a few points such as you have used a large sample size, right? So we have used a large sample size in National Survey of Children's Health. 29,433 is a pretty large sample size. Also, it's a nationally representative data. So since it is nationally representative, the results can be generalized to the population, right? At least to the population that you have worked with. So these can be the strengths. These are, again, just a few examples. Limitations, you can state some issues or questions that the study could not address, some limitations that you face. And also you have to state how it may have affected the results of your research. So it's important that you include strengths and limitations in the discussion section. And lastly, you have to write about future research and conclusion. So when you write about future research, you can talk a little bit about, based on your findings, you would like to make some recommendations to uh, people who are in future going to do research on the same topic. And you can also use the limitations of your research to write the specific section, and then you can say that future studies should address the limitations that were found in this study. And lastly, you have to just write a conclusion. Conclusion should not be more than 4 to 5 sentences. Even if you write 2 to 3 sentences, it should be good enough. But it's important that you draw a brief conclusion from this entire research study that you have conducted, mainly addressing the research question. So these are all the sections that you need to include in your discussion. So what not to include in the discussion? Do not introduce any new results. Stick to what you found, stick to the numbers that you are going to report. Do not introduce any new numbers, any new data, anything that you have not talked about in the previous 3 sections, okay? Please remember this. This is very, very important. You cannot introduce completely new results that you have not talked about previously. Do not over exaggerate your study results. So if you find a positive association, do not write a lot about those positive associations. Do not over interpret, right? We have to avoid excessive speculations. So yes, we are going to state the importance of the study, but without over interpretation or over exaggeration of the data results. At the same time, also do not underestimate your study results. That is also important. So you should write study limitations. However, you should not write them to the extent that it questions the credibility of your research. Yes, there were limitations, yet this study is credible. So there is no study which is like, completely flawless. There are always at least 1 or 2 study limitations, because no study can cover all the aspects of a research. So therefore we should write limitations, but make sure that when you're doing this, you do not underestimate the results of the study. Also, do not put a lot of emphasis on the strengths or weaknesses of the study. You simply have to state them in a few sentences. So next we'll come to when we write the discussion section, what should we specifically use and what should we specifically consider? So first is summarizing findings without statistics. So whenever you are working on a research, you have to make sure that you are using specific terminology. So over here, I have stated a few examples where when you're summarizing your findings, you can write the study demonstrated that, and then you can go ahead and write what your study has demonstrated. The results from the study indicate that. The analysis suggests that, right? These are just examples which I'm giving you, which you can use in your writing. The data results support the theoretical framework that suggests, so if you're using a theoretical framework in your paper, only then use this specific sentence. Otherwise, you need not use it. Also, remember, when you're writing the discussion section, you should not include as much as possible, unless it is extremely important or necessary for you to use numbers. Most 99% of discussion which are written in the scientifically published papers they do not include any statistical results. So make sure that you are summarizing the key findings. However, you're doing this without using any kind of statistics. So once you do this, then you have to interpret your findings. So you have to explain the meaning of your results. So when you did this in the results section, you were simply stating what those numbers mean, right? So I said this in the results section in the previous module, that you do not have to interpret your findings. However, in discussion, you need to interpret your findings, but do not use any numbers. You can discuss the patterns or correlations that you found in the data. You can also write whether these findings support your study hypothesis or not. So if you hypothesize that there is a positive association between the exposure and outcome, is that what you found in your results? And if yes, then you have to write that specifically. You also need to explain any unexpected results. So if you expected that there will be a positive association, however, when you did your analysis, you did not see that. You instead saw a negative association. Then you have to explain that also, and also add reasons that why could it be so that you got some unexpected results opposite to what you hypothesized. Also consider some alternative explanations. I said this previously also, that you have to give some different and alternative explanations so that you are able to defend your approach. So this is extremely important when it comes to research, because there have been times that even after a particular paper is published, there it's not very common, it's rare, but there have been times when that paper was retracted from the journal. So it was published, it was out there maybe for a few days or a few months, and then there were some other researchers which questioned the credibility of that research, which there are people out there who can question that you have not written this in a way, or you are not defending your approach, and you don't want that to happen. So therefore, it's important that you provide some kind of alternative explanations defending your specific approach. Also, when you are writing your interpretations, you can use these specific wordings. The results from the study are in line with the study hypothesis, and then you can write what you hypothesized and what you found. You can also say, contrary to the associations hypothesized in the study between the factors. So this sentence you can use only if you're getting some associations or results which are opposite to what you expected. Okay, so only then use this specific sentence. You can also say, the study results do not support conclusions of Siegel at all. Again, this is just an example. So let's say you are using an article by Siegel and at al., which was published in 2015. However, what you found is different than what was found by this specific author. So then you can write your interpretation using this specific sentence, that the study results do not support the conclusions from Siegel et al. In 2015, which was the article published on, and then you can write the specific title of the article or the specific topic of the article. Again, Siegel et al. Is just an example. You have to replace this with whatever article you are referring to in your specific study. Also, you can write that although the research results may suggest XYZ, okay, so XYZ is whatever your research results suggest. So, or you can also write, however, there is a more plausible explanation of the findings which can be made based on the findings of study with similar questions, and then you can state that plausible explanation. So again, this is very important for you to write so that you can defend what your approach is and why did you decide to take this specific approach to answer the research question. So next, coming to describing study implications. So in this part, you're going to relate the results of your study to what was found during the literature review. You need to explain how your findings are related to what was found previously, and also what more are you adding. So again, this is an extremely important point. We are not doing research only to show that what was done previously is same as to what we are doing. No, that is not the purpose of research, just to show that there are still similarities. Whenever you do research, you have to add something new, and when you're adding something new, you are filling in that knowledge gap, right? So it's important that you mention this. Also explain if your study results support any existing literature or are you challenging any existing literature. So for example, if there have been studies for the past 20 years which have been saying that caregiving is extremely burdensome and it is not good for women. However, in your study, you find that women who are caregiving actually live longer and have very good physical health. So, again, if you are finding something that is contradictory to what has been published in the past 20 years, then you need to have an explanation for it. And for that, you need to dive in deeper into your study. So, let's say you find that caregiving is actually contributing to longevity in women, and it is also helping them to maintain their health or physical function. So why could it be? Then you have to write some kind of a defense or an explanation for it. So one explanation could be that it keeps them active, right? Caregiving, it keeps them active, physically active, and physical activity leads to good health. So that could be one explanation. Another explanation you could give, if you're finding something that is contradictory, especially to the example that I gave you, you can say that having to care for someone can actually lead to increased mental support or moral support for the woman, and that could lead to longevity in them, right? There could be several psychosocial factors that could lead. Again, I'm using this just as an example, and you have to write these kind of explanations only if you find that your results are not in line with the literature and your results are challenging the existing literature. Also, you have to write about the consequences and how they can be applied to the field of practice. So again, this becomes a very important part, and this is the main thing why we are doing research. So what are the consequences of the results? How can these results be actually applied to the field? So if you find that caregiving is actually beneficial, then you can give some kind of recommendations to the field of practice that the Caregiving Alliance should focus more on caregiving activities in women or encourage caregiving, right? So this becomes an extremely important aspect of research, and that is the whole purpose of research, that we should be able to apply what we get to the field of practice, to the practical field. So next, coming to writing study implications. Again, these are just a few examples. You can start by saying the results from the study enhance the understanding of A, B, C, or enhance the understanding of whatever your exposure or outcome is. You can also say, while previous studies have focused on so and so, XYZ, the results from this study demonstrate, right? So when you're saying this, you are telling the audience that what are the implications of your particular results. You can also say the results from the study build on existing literature, further providing evidence. So when you're using this particular sentence over here, when you're using this particular sentence over here, that the results from the study build on existing literature, it means that what you found in your study is similar to what was found previously. Also, you can say that the results from the study should be taken into consideration when, and then you can write specific conditions when this result should be taken into consideration. You can also say that the experimental results provided a new perspective into the association between the exposure and the outcome, whatever your exposure and outcome is. So again, these are just examples of how you can write your study implications. Next, coming to limitations and recommendations. So the other researchers who are reading this article, they need to know that although these findings are very sound, there may be some differences in results if additional factors were considered, right? So that becomes your limitations because you cannot possibly cover all the factors that are available in association with the exposure and outcome. So you have to write about the limitations. You also need to write about how your findings can be applied to future research. So some examples are future research should take into account several factors and then you can list those factors, or you can also say future studies should establish the credibility of certain variables which probably you were not able to include in your specific study. So when you're writing the limitations, again, these are just a few examples of how you can write. You can say that the study has a few limitations which should be addressed, and then you can write 1, 2, 3, whatever your limitations are. You can also say that the study results cannot be generalized to the entire population because, so let's say you're using the National Survey of Children's Health, and obviously the results from those studies cannot be generalized to the entire population because it's just a children's data. So then you have to, that becomes a limitation because it can be applied only to a specific age group, let's say. So let's say you're doing this research and you have excluded the age group of 0 to 5 years, right? Just like the example that we saw in class. So in that case, that becomes your limitation, that even though it is a children's data, the results from the study cannot be applied to this specific age group of children because these were not excluded. This particular age group was not included. It was excluded. So this becomes your study limitation. Or you can also write that due to lack of data on XYZ, the results cannot confirm. So let's say you're doing a study on asthma and smoking, and there were a few health factors that you wanted to consider. However, those factors are not available in that data set, then that becomes your limitation and you can write that. You can also write that the study methodology was restricted due to certain factors. So whatever method you used for conducting this research, it could be restricted. Again, this is just an example. Not every methodology is restricted, but sometimes there are occasions where the study methods have to be restricted due to several factors or circumstances. Or you can also write that it was beyond the scope of the study to address certain factors, and then again you can mention those factors. So these are just examples of how you can write your study limitations. So lastly, this is the discussion checklist. These are all the things that you should check that you have included in your discussion section. Again, your discussion section shouldn't be more than 2 pages, and it shouldn't be less than, I would say, like, 1 page or 1.5 page. Um, and in all that writing, you have to include a concise summary of your important findings. You have to include the interpretation of your results. Also, citation is extremely important. You have to cite appropriately, provide a clear significance and some alternative explanations, state the theoretical implications of the study and the practical implications. As I stated previously, that you have to mention how can your results be applied in the practical field. Even if you don't write the strengths of the study, it is important that you should mention the study limitations. There is no scientific journal out there which will accept your paper if you do not include study limitations. Okay, you have to include what your limitations were. Make some suggestions for future researchers just like you, and end it with a brief conclusion. So once you cover all these points, your discussion section is complete, and you should be able to make a good discussion section if you include all these points. So this was it for this specific lecture. In the next video, I will cover actual written discussion sections, and I will show you how those written discussion sections in the published literature have covered each of the points that we discussed in this specific lecture. So that will be it. Thank you.